Hi, I'm Adele from In the Hoop Online. I just want to welcome you to my tutorial for this large bunny sewing pattern. Okay, so we need to start off by printing out your pattern pieces. Now you can print them onto paper, or I would suggest if you want to use the pattern pieces as templates so you can keep reusing those, you can print those onto card, the heaviest card that your printer will take. Alternatively, what we can do is print them out onto paper and then transfer those onto card by tracing around the outsides. Once your pattern pieces are all cut out, we just need to prepare these. Now there's several markings on the pattern pieces that need to be then transposed onto your fabrics. So we've got the eye here. What I do is just take a little quick unpick, make a little hole into the centre of the markings so we can then put our chalk pencil through the holes on the pattern pieces to mark the pencil markings onto the fabric. So this is where the arm joints would go. All the red circles are all joint markings. So that's really important. So we need to be able to get those in the right place on the animal so we've not got arms or legs put in the wrong places. This is just quickly showing you one way to use your pattern pieces when you're using them as a template. When you're cutting out fabrics, particularly fur fabrics, this is how you would do that. You need to trace the template pieces onto the back of your fur. You can then just cut out the pattern pieces on the backing only. Never cut through your fur pile when you're using fur. Always just cut the backing pieces. Okay, so what we need to do now is start with the ears. Okay, so we need to cut out the ears. We need to cut one piece in the main fabric and then one piece in reverse in the main fabric. So that just means flipping the pattern piece over. And then we need to do the same again in the lining fabric. So we can see we've got 4 pieces of ear patterns in total. So to prepare those for the sewing, we need to put the right sides together. So we've got one lining and one main fabric per ear. Put the right sides facing, and then we will be stitching the seam allowance around the edge as indicated by the dotted lines on the patterns. Now the seam allowances are all 5mm on these patterns. So if you prepare each ear, pin them, like I say, with right sides together, and then you can take them to your sewing machine and stitch those together. I'll just actually say here that the fabric I'm using are cotton fat quarters, and because cotton's a little bit finer, I do feel that it's best to interface the fabric just to give it that extra bit of stability. So I've used the Vilene H180, which is the ultra-fine iron-on stabiliser. Like I say, when you're doing teddy bears, especially heads, they do need to be stuffed very firmly. So the interfacing just gives it that little bit of extra support, and it also helps prevent the edges from fraying as well once you've done the seams. So here we've got the ear stitched together. We've stitched the seam around the edge, leaving that open end so we can turn the ear through at a later stage. We just now need to snip towards the seam allowance. Now this is just up to the seam. Do not cut that seam. We definitely don't want those stitches opening up. But snipping into the fabric here just helps it turn through and give that smoother curve. We do this on all outer curves, and then again on all inner curves and any sharp corners that you've got to turn through. So this is the inner curve at the bottom, so snip into each side. But like I say, be very, very careful you don't snip your seam stitching. And when the seams are cut, you can just turn through the ear. I always start at the top and turn in the end through and push that right through. Now if you want, you can use a turning instrument. I like using chopsticks. You could use a pair of hemostats, so long as the end isn't very pointed. This opening is quite wide, so you can actually use your hand and then just push the fabric down to turn it through. So turn the ear through and make sure that you push out all the side seams. I've got my handy chopstick here again. Just a normal wooden chopstick without a sharp point on the end. And you can just insert that and push out all the side seams to make these seams really nice and smooth. I then give mine a bit of a press with an iron just to make all the seams nice and sharp at the end. And here we've got one of the ears nicely pressed. Just need to make another second ear then. The next sections to prepare are the head pieces. So we've got a head 1 pattern here. That says that you need to cut one and then one in reverse. So we've got one of the right way around, and then you flip the pattern the opposite way. So turn it upside down and then cut it out in reverse. And as we've mentioned before, we've got those eye markings on here that we need to also make sure that we get those marked onto the fabric. And this is so the eyes are put in the right place, so we've not got eyes right up in the forehead area of the teddy. Now we've also got a nose on here. Now on this particular one, I've actually later cut out a nose in felt and stitched that on. Now if you do want to put the markings on at this stage, do so for the nose as well. I haven't, because I kind of know where I wanted it placing once the head's stuffed. This you can also put on if you're using one of the safety noses, the triangular safety noses, so you can put those markings on as well. So to prepare this for stitching, again we need to cut them out, put the right sides together, and again only where that dotted line's indicated do you need to do the seam. So that's stitching on the front side of the face, so only down the forehead, nose area, and then we go right down to the bottom of the head through the chin into the neck. So again, a 5mm seam allowance. Okay, so now we've got to prepare the head 2 piece. So this is just one that you cut one piece in. Now the head 2 has got ear markings. This is where you'll put your ears into the head. So just transpose those ear markings onto the face of your head 2 pattern piece. Just do those both sides. And make sure that they're all clear so you can see the markings as to where you can put the ears. So what we need to do then now is line up the open end of the ear onto those markings that we've placed on the head. So when you're placing your ear, what you need to remember is that the inner ear, so the ear part, the ear fabric that is closest to the head, needs to be facing upwards. So when you're placing your ear, just make sure that you know which side of the ear you want as the inner ear and face that upwards. Pin the ear in place to the back of the head and then take to the sewing machine and stitch the ear to the headpiece. Now that stitch line needs to be within the 5mm seam allowance. So make sure your stitch line is just a couple of millimetres in from the edge of your headpiece fabric. So we need to do that for both ears, making sure that they are both in line and on that horizontal line together. Next we finish assembling the head. So we've got the head 1 pattern pieces here that we stitched together, and the head back with the ears attached. We need to put them all together, stitching the back of the head with the front of the head pieces with right sides facing. So open up head pattern pieces 1 that you attached earlier and evenly pin those to the back of the head. Now the ears that we've got attached to that, you can roll them up, make sure that they are out of the way inside that seam allowance, making sure that you're going to be able to sew that 5mm seam allowance all around the head without the ears getting attached in that seam. Can be done, ask me how I know. We don't want to have any unpicking at all, so just be careful with your pinning, making sure it's very straight all the way around. The pattern pieces will line up together quite easily. I always start at the top seam, centre seam, go to the bottom and then work the sides in, whether I start in the middle of the side or work around the side if it's easy enough to do. That's just the way I find it. Obviously, find your own way. This is me just rolling the ears up. They are quite fiddly. Now, sometimes if you're actually working with thicker fabrics, particularly in fur, what you can do is leave the ears out, sew the head pieces together on their own, and then you can ladder stitch the ears to the head once it's been stuffed at the end. Like I say, if you're working in really thick fur or a long pile fur, you might find that easier because those ears are very long. They are very bulky if they're in fur. So you might find them to roll those up, it might just be a little bit harder. So you can always stitch them on afterwards by hand using some really nice strong thread and a ladder stitch. So when you've got all the pins in place, like I say, make sure that you've nothing in those seam allowances to catch in there. When all your pins are in place, you need to stitch the two head pieces together. So we're stitching just around the outside edge with the 5mm seam allowance, leaving the bottom end open, which is where you're going to stuff the head. So this is on the pattern piece, the dotted line, like we said before, is the stitch line that you need to stitch. So once the head pieces are stitched together, we then again need to snip into those seams, towards the seams, not actually into the seams, just towards them, on all your curved edges, particularly the nose and that curve round the back of the head, and then again on that inner curve on the neck area. Just makes it all a lot smoother, particularly if you're working in a cotton fabric or any woven fabric. Knitted fabrics, it doesn't matter as much because knitted fabrics do actually give a little bit on the curved seams when you turn them through and stuff them. Just mainly for these woven fabrics like your cottons. So when all your curved edges have been snipped into and you've prepared all those seams, you can turn the head through the right way around. So pull the ears through first, it's always a little bit easier. Now this again is kind of showing that if you are going to be making your rabbit in fur, you might want to put the ears on afterwards. The ears can be quite bulky, and getting it through that neck area can be fiddly, so just think about that before you start putting your bunny together if you are doing it in fur. That's where it is always easier to put your ears on afterwards once the head's stuffed. So we've got the head turned the right way around. Just again, make sure that you've got those eye markings on. This is the moment where you need to put in your eyes and or your safety nose if that's what you're using. Like I say, with this one I did add a nose on afterwards. I stitched that on afterwards once the bunny was stuffed. But just think about that at this stage because this is when you need to add your safety eyes and nose. I recommend 14mm safety eyes for this size bunny. At the end of the day, the choice is yours. You can use whatever size you want, but this is just the size that I prefer. Now with safety eyes, you get two pieces. You get the eye and then the locking washer. So to fit these, what you need to do is get a little stitch unpicker. And you need to make a tiny cross cut in your fabric. Now do not make this cut very large. It only needs to be very, very small. So like I said, make a tiny cross cut, just large enough for the end of the post of the eye to fit through. If you make this hole too large, when you've got the eye in place and then you start stuffing the head, your fabric can open up and then your eye will just simply fall out and you'll have a huge hole. So just make that very, very tiny. Again, another good reason as well is to have some interfacing on the back of the fabric that kind of protects this hole at this stage as well. So if you push the post of the eye through the fabric from the face side, make sure that your fabric's nice and straight, ease the fabric over the back of that post, and then with your locking washer, with the ridges facing upwards, the locking ridges facing upwards, push that over the top of the post and then lock it down as securely as you possibly can, as far as it'll go. And so just make sure that the fabric is nice and straight, and then you want to put the other eye in at the same time. It can be a little bit fiddly, so make sure you're not all fingers and thumbs like I am. So if you are going to be using as well the safety nose, you can do that in the same way as you do the eyes. Now, one thing that I will say at this stage, when you are doing your front seam on your face, if you're going to use a safety nose, you can put a couple of back stitches in before and after where the opening will be for that safety nose. Personally, I don't like using them, and that is one of the reasons, because I don't like that seam opening up in order to put that safety nose in. But just bear that in mind, that when you are going to be doing that seam, that is what you can do. So your nose would go in at that stage as well. We've just got the starting of the stuffing now with this one. You need to stuff your head as firmly as possible. I can't say this enough, that even if you think you've stuffed it enough, stuff it some more. Once you've thought you've stuffed it, get your chopstick or a stuffing tool and pack that stuffing very, very firm. Very important that with the shape of these heads, they need to be stuffed around the edges, in the back of the head, and in the nose area particularly. If you're making a fur bear, make sure that nose area is stuffed very, very firm, especially if you want to sew your nose on it as well. So this is a head firmly stuffed. If you can see around in the back and in the nose area, those seams are very nice and curved. We've not got any odd shapes going on at that side. But if you look here, you might think it looks as stuffed as you can, but it's not. So get that chopstick, poke everything down, and again add more stuffing. You can see in this side area here, on this side seam, the head shape is quite a strange shape. Now this is so it can take that stuffing, and then once it's stuffed firmly, the head curves round at the back and makes that shape a lot better. So make sure that you don't understuff that side area. We can now prepare the bottom of the head around the neck area for the closing at the later stage. So using some really strong thread. Now I use bonded nylon, you can use upholstery thread. Make sure it's a really strong thread, because you do need to have quite a lot of pressure on this thread. I also double thread it, so thread your needle and then knot both ends together at the end. So about 5mm down from that open edge, you want to put some running stitches all the way around the opening, so we can prepare this to close the head around the head joint. When you finish stitching all the way around the neck opening, just leave your needle there on your thread and again fill up the bottom of the head. Stuff that head even more so. Make sure that you've got the stuffing packed right down, and it needs to come up right almost, well, in fact it does need to come up right up to that stitching that you've just done in the closure. So keep packing that stuffing in there, and then when it's stuffed you need to take the head joint, which is a 45mm head joint for this bunny. Now the joint has got a post. There's 3 parts to these slimline safety joints that I use. You need to take the post section, pop it into the bottom of the head area, and you can pull the threads tight. Now if you look here, there is quite a lot of excess fabric there. There's still room to put more stuffing in. So this is what, I can't say this enough, make sure you put more stuffing in. So we've now packed all that stuffing in again, and we're going to put the head joint in place again. So put that in place, pull on your thread, and you see it's a lot firmer around the head joint now is the fabric. You've got more stuffing in there. So you need to tie off your thread. Now put your needle in, wrap your thread round the needle end several times, and then holding that, pull it tight. What I then do is go around the head opening again with some running stitches. You can make those just even further into the fabric from the open end of the head, and then that pulls and draws in that fabric a lot tighter around your post of your joint. And when you've gone round the head again and tied off several knots, push the needle into the head away from where you've tied off before you cut your threads. This just stops the tying off knots coming undone at a later stage. So just hold your threads and cut that off. And there we have the head complete. Just set that aside then for later so we can attach it to the rest of the body. So we need to now start preparing the body. We've got 2 pattern pieces. We've got body 2, which is cutting 1 piece of fabric. And again, we need to be able to transpose those pattern markings onto your fabric pieces. So this marking here with the red circle is the joint placement. Now that's the joint placement where the head will attach to the body. So very important, make sure that with a chalk pen or pencil that you mark that fabric on the face side as to where that joint placement will be. Next is body pattern 1. Now this one you need to cut 2 pieces. You need to cut one way and then the other in reverse. So we've got body 1 cutting the first way, transposing these joint placement markings. These are the placement markings for the arm and the leg. So transposing those pattern markings onto your fabric with your chalk pencil, making sure that those markings are visible. So cut 1 plus 1, so it's cutting 1, flipping your pattern over and cutting the other in reverse. Again, making sure that these joint placement markings are transposed onto your face of your fabric. Sometimes with this, when you flip the pattern round the other way, you might need to push the holes through on your paper piece so you can mark those pieces. Again, checking that you've got the chalk markings through on the right side of your fabric on that body 1. Now we need to then get this ready to be stitching. Now we stitch this together down the back seam. but we have to leave an opening gap in that back seam. We don't stitch all the way through. So this opening here, we need to make sure that we mark that on the fabric. So you're marking this on the reverse side of the fabric now. So mark that opening on your reverse of your fabric. So we've got pattern body 1, 2 pieces of fabric with the right sides facing, pin them together down that back seam, and then stitch the back seam, leave that body opening. Do not stitch that closed. You will not be able to turn it through at a later stage. So now we've got the body 1 pieces stitched together. We then take body 2. With the right side facing upwards on body 2, open out body 1 pieces that you attached earlier and pin those to body 2. You just open up that seam a little, it'll make it a little bit easier. And then we pin the edges together. Now you've got to make sure that all these edges are lined up perfectly. If you've sewn that back seam correctly, this will all line up together. So if you start at the top, pin that top edge, go to the bottom and open up that seam and then pin that bottom together. It just starts getting everything in place, so then you can start lining the sides up together a little bit easier. So if we pin all the way around the body until it is all pinned together. So when you're happy that you've lined everything up okay and pinned them together, stitch with a 5mm seam allowance all the way around the body. When you've stitched both body pieces together, you want to turn the body through the right way around through that opening that you left in that back seam. So pushing the fabric through, straighten all your seams out, make sure everything's straight. And this is your body completed. At this stage we can attach the head to the body. So if you take that body piece that you've now completed, and where you've made that marking in the top of the body, get your quick unpick again and make that tiny cross cut in your fabric. Again, like I said with the eyes, you need to make it as small as you possibly can. We do not want this fabric opening up when we're putting the joint together. This may need to be slightly bigger than when the hole that you did for the eyes, because if you remember, the post on that neck joint is a lot thicker. So again, these joints, slimline joints that I use, they come in 3 pieces. We've got the post that you push through from the front side, from the outer side, through the right side of the fabric. Push that post through that fabric. We then have a washer, which is the larger disc that you can see there, and then the locking nut which is the smaller one. So this is how we fit all our joints. Push the post through from the right side of the fabric through to the inside of the body. Take the big washer and place that over the post, and then I take the locking washer. It's got a slight raised side. Make sure that that side is facing upwards. And what I do is just push the end on just to the end of the post first, while the post is hanging outside of that back opening seam. I then push it all inside the body. Make sure that the fabric is straight. And then this is the trickiest joint to actually put together. You need to then push down the two joints, the two locking washer and the normal washer, as far down onto that head post as you possibly can. So make sure you push down as firmly as you can, making sure that that locking washer is on the head post as far as it'll go. And that is your head attached to your body, and that part is now complete. We now move on to the leg. The pattern is asking to cut 2 one way and then 2 in reverse. If we just ignore the fact that I've used 2 different fabrics, you can see here though we've got cut 2 one way, flip the pattern over and then cut 2 in reverse. The arrow on that is just indicating the grain line, so make sure that you set the pattern with that arrow going vertically down your grain line of your fabric. That's especially important if you're using fur. So for each leg we take the 2 pattern pieces and place them with right sides facing. From the pattern we need to make sure that we do several markings. Again, we've got the joint placement marking. Now that joint placement needs to go on the inside of each leg. We've also got a stitch line to go around there, which is your seam allowance, and again we've got that back opening. You need to make sure that when you stitch around the outside edge with your 5mm seam allowance that you leave that leg opening. That is to turn your leg through when it's complete, so make sure that you do those pattern markings. So for the joint placement, that goes on the inner leg of each leg, and the leg opening for turning through. So this is me just checking here which side, because I've got 2 different pattern fabrics. I'm just deciding which side I want, which pattern piece basically on the rabbit. I've decided that I want the same fabric as the body as the inside leg. Now I think in hindsight I probably would have done it the opposite way around to that, but this is the way I did it for this design. So decide if you've got 2 different fabrics, which fabric's going on the inside, and then mark the joint placement on the inner leg piece. So this is marking the leg joint on that inner side piece. So you're marking on the front side of your fabric, the right side of your fabric of the inner leg. So we need to do that on both pieces. So this is where we flip the pattern round and do the same in reverse, but again going through that joint placement with your chalk pencil on the right side of the inner leg fabric. Okay, then we need to sew each leg together. So again, take the 2 pattern pieces for each leg and put them right sides together. Pin them together and then stitch those seam lines with a 5mm seam allowance around the outside edge, leaving the turning gap through the back of the leg. Now the bottom of the foot at this stage is left open. Again, as before, on any curved seam, and it's particularly important on this one here at the ankle, the front of the ankle, snip in towards your seam, do not cut that seam allowance. And again, like I said before, this is just to enable it to turn through and make a nice smooth curve. So going round all the curved edges of each leg. We're now ready to place the foot pad onto the leg. Now I'm going to go into the pattern markings on the foot pad on a separate video, but this is just for the basic foot pad. So we've cut out 2 feet in our fabric, and take the first foot pad. What you need to do is fold it in half with right sides together to find the centre points of both the toe and the heel on that foot pad. So I just put a little pin in to find both those points. And then with the leg still inside out, we want to place the foot pad, offer it up to the opening on the bottom of the leg, with the right side facing inwards of that foot pad. We then pin the foot evenly all around that opening of the bottom of the leg. Now make sure when you're pinning this that you've got the toe, which is the wider part of the foot pad, at the toe of the leg of the foot. So the wider part of the foot pad to the toe, and the narrower part of the foot pad to the heel. Otherwise you're going to have a rather strange shaped foot on your bunny. So pin the centre of the toe pad of the foot pad to the centre seam at the toe, and the centre of the heel of the foot pad to the centre seam in the heel of the foot, and then evenly pin that foot pad round the opening. Now you will need to ease this in, particularly if you are using a woven fabric like this cotton. A little bit fiddly, a little bit tricky. Use as many pins as you need to make sure that you're pinning that in without any puckers. The more time that you take to do this, the better the results you'll have at the end. When I've pinned all the way around, what I do, because I don't like going to the sewing machine with all these pins in place, I whip stitch the foot pad to the bottom of the leg. I just find that it'll make it far easier when you're sewing without all these pins in place. You're not going to damage any needles by hitting your pins, and you're not going to have to keep starting and stopping to remove the pins either. So whip stitch all the way around your foot, making sure that, like I said before, that your foot pad is nicely in place and there's no puckers. So we've got the foot pad whip stitched into place. We then now sew the foot pad to the leg with your 5mm seam allowance on your sewing machine. Again, I'm just snipping in towards that seam on these curved edges. It just gives a slightly nicer finish on that curve when you turn your foot through or your leg through. So you do the same for both legs and feet, and then when you've completed the second one, you can turn each leg through the right way through the opening in the back of the leg seam. And these are the two legs finished. Now we need to move on to the arms. Again, as with the legs, we need to cut 2 pattern pieces one way, flip the pattern over and cut 2 pattern pieces in reverse. Again, I've used these separate fabrics because I was using fat quarters. I decided to use separate fabrics for the inner and outer legs. Again, you've got the grain line showing which way is the direction of the grain, particularly when you're using your fur. So make sure all your pile goes downwards in the direction of the arrow if you're using a directional pile fur. Okay, we need to again mark on the joint points. And again, this is on the inner arm fabric. So we're marking on the face side of the inner arm of the fabric. Okay, so we take the 2 pattern pieces for each arm and with right sides facing, line them up on top of each other so the outside edges are all in line. We then need to mark from the pattern piece that opening in the back of the arm. So again, we'll need to mark where the seam allowance needs to be stitched. Again, 5mm seam allowance, and then mark the opening, which is the turning point through which you turn your arms through. So mark that on both of your pattern pieces. So pin your pieces together, take to the sewing machine and stitch around as indicated by the dotted line for each arm. Again, we're going to be snipping in towards that seam on all the curved edges, on the inner curves and the sharp outer curve edges to give that smooth finish when we turn the arms through. when you've done all your snipping, turn each arm through the right way round, making sure all your seams are opened up nicely. And when the arms are through, we need to then prepare those for the joints to go into the arms. Now for the joints, we're using the 45mm slimline joints. These are the same ones as that we used for the head. So as you can see here again, we've got the 3-part joints, and we fit them exactly the same way as we did before. So make a small cross cut using your quick unpick in your fabric and fit the joints in from the inside this time of your arm. So this is making your small incision cross cut with your quick unpick. Again, try not to make it too big at this stage because we don't want that fabric opening up. Insert the joint inside the arm, and as before, ease that post, this time from the wrong side, through the fabric. If you make a smaller incision and it's not large enough, you can always make it bigger, just don't make it too big. So that's your joint fitted into your first arm, and then just repeat for the second. And these are the joints in both arms now completed, so just set those aside for the time being, and then we need to fit the joints to the legs. Now we're using 55mm slimline safety joints for the legs. We fit these in exactly the same way as we do the arms, so I'm just going to go ahead, whiz through and do that for you. And these are both the leg joints in place now, ready for stuffing. So now we need to stuff our arms and legs. And just a few little tips here, that when you're stuffing your arms and legs, never put stuffing underneath the joint. Only stuff over the top of it. It just stops your arms and legs looking like they're just kind of falling off your body. So never stuff underneath where the post goes through the fabric. Just always make sure that you stuff over the top. I also leave the openings in the back of my limbs open as well until the body's been stuffed, so I never close up any seams until right at the end. Another thing I will also say as well is when attaching your limbs is make sure that you put the right limb in the right place. So once you've fitted a limb to your body, hold your bear up or your teddy up, make sure that the foot is on the right leg place, make sure the foot is facing the right way, before you add your washer and the locking nut. So as I did last time fitting the head on, I just put the locking washer just over the end of the post, and then I can tuck it all inside the body. Straighten your fabric up, make sure that there's not any fabric puckered, and then push those two pieces together. Again, pushing them in as far as they'll go, making sure they're nice and fixed solid. You can go ahead then and attach all 4 limbs to your teddy, and then you'll be ready to stuff the body once they're all fitted. And here she is, almost ready to be finished off. Your little bunny. I always start at the neck area when I'm stuffing the teddies, and what you need to do is stuff the neck very, very firmly. You need to give that head some support on the body because the head is so heavy, as with us humans. It does need a lot of careful stuffing around that neck area. So push your stuffing in front and at the sides and at the back of the joint. Pack that as firmly as you possibly can. You also at this point as well need to make sure you've got plenty of stuffing over the joints of the arms. You do need to make sure that your teddy has got a neck. Your arms do not want to sit right up under its head, so you need to have that little bit of a gap. But like I say, pack it as firmly as you possibly can so it's got support for the head. And when you're happy with the neck, you can continue down and stuff the rest of the body. Start at the bottom and then work your way back up through to that neck area. Stuffing it, making sure the shape is really nice and round and lovely as you want it. So when you've stuffed it, check your teddy all round, make sure you're happy with the shape. Again, make sure that that neck area is stuffed well and you've not got stuffing falling out of your seams. If you're happy with everything and you're happy with the stuffing in your arms and legs, you can then go ahead and stitch it up. So again, using a strong thread like a bonded nylon or an upholstery thread, you can thread your needle with a single thread this time, put a decent knot in the end, and then we ladder stitch the seams closed. Now a ladder stitch gives a better finish than an overstitch or a whip stitch. It just makes that seam close a little bit nicer. So if you can see on the video here, when you're doing a ladder stitch, the thread goes horizontally across the seam, then your needle goes into the fabric, goes up vertically to the opening, and then across back the other way. You see these seams run vertical to the opening, the thread growing horizontally across the opening. I kind of put my finger inside and then open that fabric up a bit so you can see how far in you're going from the outside edge of that pattern piece. You need to be in 5mm from the edge of that fabric piece. So when you've done quite a few of your ladder stitches, you can then pull your thread taut and close up that seam. And this is pulling on the thread now, closing up that seam. Carry on until you've got to the top, and then you want to tie off your thread with a couple of knots. Insert the needle into the teddy and bring it out away from where you've tied that off, and then cut your threads. So this is tying off your thread. Insert your needle, wrap your thread around the end of the needle and pull that tight, make a little knot. I always tend to do a couple at the end. And then to finish off, put your needle back in where your knot is, come out of the teddy away from that area, pull your thread through and then cut your thread off. Repeat the closure for all 4 limbs and then your bunny is finished. To make the felt nose from this bunny, I cut out the template from the head 1 pattern piece. You then take a piece of felt and fold over the edge and line up the dotted line of the template on the fold line. You then cut round the template and you end up with a triangular piece of felt. You pin that felt piece to your bunny and then with some embroidery floss just stitch the nose to the bunny.